Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now delighted to celebrate March Women in Sales Month with another fabulous female sales leader, Steph White, who's Senior Revenue Enablement Leader in a tech company in Toronto, Ontario. So love that she's Canadian as well. And really enjoyed speaking with Steph, learning about her experience starting in marketing. And I think it's really important to mention that, her understanding of the voice of the customer and able to bring that that experience to her sales role. And I feel that's what's made her so successful. Just being empathetic to the true needs through her marketing background, and now really her commitment to helping women in sales as well. Being a woman in sales, how can we help women lean in? How can we hold space for them to find their authentic voice, to lean into their curiosity? And a lot of what she said was, when you find yourself holding back and in these uncomfortable situations, how can we leverage our inner child, like our 7-year-old self? And what would they say? And they would probably ask the why questions and really lean into the curiosity. But something later in life happens to us, and there's almost a little bit of this learned helplessness. And how can we get past that? And she shared a lot of great tactics, even, when we think about our failures and how the balance between seeing them as failures and really, playing that non-serving message over and over in our head that doesn't help us, balancing that with their lesson learned. And she said, she created a list of, the wins and the losses and the pluses and the minuses. And it's just when you write it down, there's definitely some lesson learned and there's some things we could do differently. But too often that's where our focus goes. And we lose sight of the good things we did, the positives. And when we count up these small positives, and they might be insignificant to others in the external, but within us, this is who we are becoming. These are the traits that we're continuing to build that over time, when we stack them, are going to contribute to the external results. But it's who we become. It starts building our purpose, our why, and we really get clarity as to who we are, which helps us, choose a role and a path in sales, help us make decision because we know what they're rooted in. And a lot of that is who we are as a person. So loved our conversation. We were very aligned on a lot of the topics of really supporting women in sales, creating an inclusive environment and holding space. Because oftentimes, the number one thing that holds us back, unfortunately, is ourselves. So if you are a woman in sales, if you're a woman thinking about getting into sales, highly encourage you to take a listen. Steph shares so many insights from her own journey and how she coaches others to really find their authentic voice, lean into the discomfort, be relatable so that we're not pretending we have all the answers. We're really disarming, showing that, we're a work in progress as well. And that invites conversation and collaboration. And again, it all starts with leaning in and really being curious. So take a listen. Let us know what you think. We'll see you next time. So it is March and it's Women in Sales Month. And I always say, oh my gosh, why do we only have 1 month dedicated to us? But I am delighted to bring Steph White to the podcast. Steph, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. And absolutely, I feel like we need 6 months plus 1 day just to catch up a little bit for the time we've lost by only having a month so far.
Oh, yeah, I would say double that.
We'll just take the year 2024. It's all about us.
Yes,
That's it.
absolutely. Well, thank you for being here. I'm delighted to have the conversation about women in sales. And I think even tying that to, women sales leaders who are in enablement and really helping understand their story. And again, how that story transcends down to future women in sales. And if we're doing things right, then hopefully we're going to attract more of them. So why don't we begin and let us know, you are in a tech driven world right now. It sounds like a male driven world. I don't want to make assumptions, but having worked there myself, I kind of recognize patterns. What got you there? Did you accidentally fall like everybody, or were you intentional?
Accidentally fall into sales or accidentally fall into tech? Because I feel like both of those can be a happy accidents.
Okay, well, let's talk about both sales and then tech sales.
Sounds good. So I actually started once upon a time, a very long time ago, in marketing of all things. And for those of you who were working, in the 200-ish time frame, you may remember a lot of the marketing campaigns back then. And actually, I look at your can of Coke, things like the Pepsi Challenge. There was live experiential marketing campaigns that big brands were getting out there and trying to do to engage consumers in different and new ways, right? Battles weren't being fought on Zoom calls or in inboxes. Battles were being fought at the stores, at the places where people were consuming products. And that's how I actually started my career, was working on marketing programs, connecting products to consumers. And it, in a very happy accident, started to evolve from marketing into sales. And what I loved about that transition was my focus from day one has always been, well, what does the customer think, touch, taste, know about the product? What do they experience? And so evolving from how are you communicating with your customers with marketing to understand what it is that they want and what you can offer into sales was just such a natural progression. And it was probably about 7 or 8 years later, I'm dating myself now, but over 10 years ago, where that just naturally started to grow into a tech sales company. Um, was a seller, was a sales leader, did customer success, did launch implementation in SaaS before finding my way into revenue enablement. And so that's where I've been for the last 6, 7 years. And, you tie that all up with a bow and we can dig into this. What is enablement really? Well, it's the coming together of figuring out how all those functions work together to support our customers best.
Mm-hmm. That's a wide bow.
It's a wide bow, but you know what? We can get it and we can do it. And I think that's where these kinds of conversations are amazing, to figure out, how did other people make that happen? How do we chart that course and take it even
Yes.
further for the next group?
Absolutely. And that's the whole goal of how can we prevent people from reinventing the wheel. And I know you're going to help us do that today. But what a great transition from marketing, because oftentimes it's the oil and water and they don't mix. But your story showed that true understanding of the voice of the customer and the benefit of that you were able to bring to sales, because usually in the two departments that feedback loop doesn't exist, but you were the loop. Like, you took that and you transitioned it beautifully to sales that had that empathy, that true understanding that I don't think many people had.
I think it's interesting. Sales Enablement Collective does a survey every year, and they ask the question, what were you doing before enablement? And generally speaking, it's, a third of people come from sales, a third of people come from instructional design or teaching or similar roles, and a third comes from everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it is so easy to pick out the folks that came from marketing first, because they don't write the value prop. They live and breathe the value prop. They understand the pain of the customer first. And that's how we then tell the story from sales to our purchasers.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually speechless there, because this is what I preach all the time. I've got nothing. There's a mic drop and it dropped on my foot. Because, it's always, and I voice of the customer, and too often it's our perception and what we think. And then we sit around this round table and we hear each other talk. But when you have the two lenses that you're able to oscillate between, you really do capture that. And everything downstream is what matters. The messaging is crystallized. You understand who the buyer is. And then all that compresses the sales cycle, makes it the desire to buy and have a great partnership. So, um, and I can see how you said it's organically, I don't know if you use that word, but like it just naturally morphed into where you are today. And I can see how it would do that.
Yeah, I think, not dissimilar than some folks that are in technical backgrounds, right? You start learning one program language, that language evolves and updates and is slowly replaced by something slightly more advanced. And as long as you're staying curious in what you're passionate about, you can just keep pulling on those threads and finding that next level and the next level. And that's such an amazing growth path that I think more of us have the opportunity to explore in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Do you think women are as curious as they could be?
Oh, I like this question. I think we are as curious as we could be. I don't think we necessarily speak up to share that curiosity as much as we could be. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not should, it's could and can.
Mm-hmm. And I think I know just in the earlier chats, we both have young daughters, and I look at them and their curiosity, and it's unstoppable. And so something happens later in life when we hold our punches and we perhaps think something, rehearse it 9 times in our head, and then someone else asks a question, not as eloquently as we would have, but nonetheless they ask it, and then we're beating ourselves up. And so I feel that we haven't lost it, but like you said, that execution, that leaning in and using our voice along the way has become stunted.
And so the question is why, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting because, yep, we both have young daughters. And mine, I don't know whether I have a civil rights lawyer. I don't know whether I have a I don't know what I have going, but she has such an innate sense of what is right and wrong and what equality is without learning the word equality.
Mm.
We have young children who understand it's not fair if the teacher only asks boys the answer. They innately know this. We all innately know this growing up in our culture. So, to your question, at what point do we become conditioned to not raise our hand as fast?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the path that got us there? But I'd argue more importantly than that, what is the path that gets us from there to being the first one to put our hand up again? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's the piece that I want to see more women embracing,
Mm-hmm.
not hesitating and instead being confident to speak up and stand out.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say, as a leader, Steph, what can we do to empower women like that? That's going to invite them. That, if you've heard of Mel Robbins, that 5 second rule where she counts down, and before you hit one, you lean in and you do whatever that uncomfortable task is. So, what are some ways that you could empower women to lean in and to do what's comfortable for some, but uncomfortable for a lot of others?
I think two things I've had leaders do with me, which was really helpful. Because to be clear, everybody, I was the person not that long ago that was too scared to speak up in an all male middle aged boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that many years ago. But two things. One, it's creating the space to not only accept and encourage somebody to stumble and try, but also to show them you're stumbling and trying.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I mean by that is, I had a leader 6, 7 years ago, um, and he was a wonderful gentleman, dad of 3, lots of sisters, believed that women belong in every boardroom and everywhere conversations are happening. And he would sit, we'd be in a room, I'd be the only female, and there'd be a moment where he would sit and he would just stare at me, just inviting. So someone would pose him the question and he would stare at me, not to pressure, not to cause fear or angst, but to encourage me to speak up in that moment because I had the answer and expertise that people by default were going to him for. So I think there's a lot of those ways we can encourage it. The flip side of that is really challenging ourselves when we've been through the path to have conversations like this, whether it is a one-to-one or a one-to-many. And what that can look like is, for example, I have someone on my team and she made a comment. She's like, well, nothing scares you. That's great, but that's so far from being accurate. I'm glad in some ways that that's her impression. But that was a moment to me where I said, now I need to be more vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it became my mission at that point to tell her when I was scared and to share with her how I was overcoming those moments. So we started in our weekly meetings when I was asking her the question, what's challenging you about this week? What's exciting you about this week? I was encouraging her to ask me the same. And I would talk through, as much as was appropriate, my logic and how I was overcoming things. And what was really interesting and beautiful in that kind of give and take was I actually became more confident sharing the challenges I was having and how I was overcoming them to use my voice.
Mm-hmm.
And by her feeling comfortable in that dialogue, she was then starting to give me advice and words of encouragement. And I saw her self confidence start to go up and her start to use her voice more. And I think it's all those little ways, Karen, that yes, sometimes it's a policy, sometimes it's a big shift, but sometimes it's all these micro moments, setting each other up for the micro moments to use our voices and feel more confident.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, the vulnerability piece is to lean into those micro moments because there is discomfort there. And so what I'm hearing there is holding space for your team, which I think is huge. And the second one is just being relatable. And I know, having spent 20 years in corporate, people would stand up at the front of the room and pretend they had all the answers and they had it all figured out. And I remember just thinking, I don't. So I guess I can't go to you because there was this disconnect. And I also think like if you're pretending you know all that, like what else are you holding back? Like immediately I didn't trust them anymore.
And this is absolutely true, right? Nobody is fearless, nobody is perfect. So,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about DE and I, right? And belonging, because the belonging piece, it's the ability to see yourself and people around you and feel like you're a part of that same potential.
Yeah. And that for me is what leadership is. It's really holding space for people. And like what you said, when you have those coaching moments, it was almost like the teacher was becoming the student. Or sorry, the student becoming the teacher for your rep. But I think when you don't model the behavior, then there's this incongruence. It's like, well, she's telling us to do something, but she's totally not doing it herself. And then there's just this inauthentic nature about it. And so I love what you did. And I know for me, I struggled to do that. I had to be up there, knowing everything. And I remember going like, "Who are you?" Like, someone said to me once, "People connect with your imperfections, not your perfections." And as soon as I heard that, I was like, "I don't have it all figured out." And there's a balance between not having it figured out and inviting your team to collectively come up with a strategy versus kind of throwing in the towel like I don't have it figured out and I don't know how to like that's not a fix that's a fixed mindset, but I think there's a balance between the two, and we have to lean into that so that in turn our team will follow the same pattern.
And I think it's embracing it too. So, in that moment you just described, and I'm sure there were many where you just tried to lean in and take a deep breath. People say fake it till you make it. I hate that expression because that suggests that you're
Mm-hmm.
being someone other than your true self. I don't want to fake it because I
Mm-hmm.
want to be me. I want to figure out how to be me in those moments in a way that isn't somebody else. So I think even
Mm-hmm.
hearing you say that, I'm smiling because that kind of example that you led with and showing that you were both being vulnerable and being brave, because by the way, being brave is doing something when you're scared to do it. Otherwise, it's just doing it. It's only called brave when it's hard or scary. But showing other people that you can rise up and you're challenging yourself and you're finding a way for your confidence, instead of people being intimidated by you and saying, "Ooh, she has all the answers too. He had all the answers. She has all the answers. I have no answers. I'm over here by myself." Suddenly they say, "Well, wait a second. I could learn from her." And then it becomes a coffee chat.
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully, you look upon that person and say, "Here's a way that I can help you. And here's some things that I've learned along my journey. Let's help get you there too."
You know who I feel is joining us in a third seat?
Oh, yes.
Brene Brown is right over to my
I
right.
know it is.
We are daring greatly around her, and all this language is I love it because it's her. I feel like she's passed her wand over us. But just what you said there is when you can disarm, and it's funny because I did not funny, but I did a training this morning and on Tuesday for women who are looking to scale their business. And a lot of, especially women who, when they're entrepreneurs and they're first time business owners, a lot of what's holding them back is their self because they're like, what do I have no right even being here. So when I'm up in front of them, I have to be hyper vigilant that even though I've done this for 20 years, I made so many mistakes starting, but also in my transition to entrepreneurship. Even though I had sales experience, I'm now selling myself and I'm selling a service. So I immediately said, like, I failed and these are the things I did. And you could see them, their shoulders come down and they were all coming up to me after asking questions. And I thought, thank God you were able, I mean, I've been doing it long enough now, but to recognize that you serve nobody when you're up at the front with these big broad shoulders, untouchable. But the whole point, like you said, was to strike up a conversation of sharing that in turn could be like, let me help you. But they're not going to even approach you if there's this hierarchy of like, she's untouchable. And I don't want that because my goal is to help people. But I think sometimes this awareness or the ego takes over and we just go there.
So here's a question for you. If the interviewee can become the interviewer in this conversation, how much of that ego do you feel like can actually be a defense mechanism for people?
Yeah, that's what it's there to protect you, right? But I even my 7-year-old daughter, I tell her when you hear that voice and she's like, "Mommy, it's not me." I'm like, "It's not you." So don't listen to it, but acknowledge that it's coming. And I think there's varying degrees of fear. Like, but there's fear that will paralyze you versus recognizing this is uncomfortable because I've never done it before. But I'm up for the challenge and still leaning into it. And I always say when again back to this session I did, what is the worst thing that could happen? They could say no, they could not show for the meetings, but nobody died. Nobody got hurt. So knowing that and thinking about all these areas where I feel like I have to know everything, I always say go to the worst case scenario, and then you build strength and resilience, and you have that as a platform to refer back to in future uncomfortable moments because there will be many of them. But if you deny yourself that opportunity to dig in and find out what am I truly made out of here, even though this is uncomfortable, even though I'm the only woman in the room, I'm going to speak up and I'm going to use my voice.
I can't help but smile listening to you speak. And I think honestly, and I think it's one of those, what is the worst case scenario? Truly. And some people may say, and listen, I've had a quota, and the reality is sometimes it is the end of the quarter, you're on a PIP. If you do not close that deal, you are stressed you're going to lose your job if you're in sales. That is absolutely a legitimate concern. I get that. But these are the exceptions and not the rule.
Mm-hmm.
And 9 times out of 10, the deal that you might lose, if we're talking about salespeople, is not going to make the deal that makes you lose your job. And if anything, it's the moment to hit pause. I still remember some of the deals that I effed up wildly and lost, and they still haunt me, 10 plus years later. But it's what do you learn from them?
Mm-hmm.
Do your post mortem, do your win loss analysis, figure out what you learned from it. If you take the time to learn why you stumbled, and remember, not every stumble is a fall, not every fall is a fail, right? Some things are just small hiccups. But if we learn from it, maybe today we lose a $100,000 deal, but we learn from it. And next month we close a $150,000 deal. And that is the whole point of this process. When we talk about growth and especially sales and talk about wanting to move our own boundaries, it's improving and increasing every day, just that little bit extra.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, it's that 1% growth every day. And I think when you look at women, sometimes we compare ourselves to others. And I always say, like, just compare yourself to who you were yesterday. And in those tough times, you leaned in and be proud of yourself. And so, what would you say, Steph, to women perhaps not giving themselves the accolades or the pat on the back that they deserve from those small wins? Just like that leaning in. I spoke up in the meeting today. I asked something like I went into the discomfort zone and not really giving yourself grace or and compassion, but also celebratory that I did that. And what's I guess the downside of not doing that?
Well, the downside is status quo or worse, right? You continue to feel that you're less than or not accomplishing the things you want to. I think the flip side of that is there's little ways that you can celebrate all your small wins. There's 2 ways I particularly love. One of them I've been doing for years. I call it a smile folder. It's cheesy. I started it when I was like 19, 20, first job, and it was literally on my computer desktop at the time, not a laptop, desktop. And it was just a list of the things that I did that led me to smile. And it was just this running list. And sometimes when I was, reflecting on that list, and I kept it going, and when I would reflect on the list at the end of the year, sometimes in January, it might be I spoke up in front of the CEO at a company wide meeting. I raised my hand and asked a question. That was something that made me smile because I was proud of myself. Well, it's interesting because by putting those mile markers in for myself in my smile folder, and it's grown and changed forms over the years, by the end of the year, when I'm writing down my win, I scroll up and I look. I'm like, in January, it was a big deal for me to ask a question to the CEO in front of 300 people. And here I am in October, and I not only raised my hand and asked a question, but I pitched a new idea in front of 300 people. And so I think just documenting those micro moments that you are proud of yourself, not the external validation. This is about internal. This is you. Put them on a list. Smile folder, another really cute way I've seen it done, my daughter likes this, is a little jar. And writing on a piece of paper the thing that you did that made you smile, with the date, you pop it in the jar. At the end of the year, on New Year's Eve, you open the jar and you read all the things that made you smile in the year before.
Oh, I'm smiling now. I got to go get a jar.
But these are the moments. I think if we just keep moving in the moments, we miss those 1%. And the key is not just keeping track of, the career wins, the quota hits, the promotions, the, pay increases. Those are all externally validated. Keep track of your external stuff. Cool for your resume. You need that. But what's most important when we're having these kinds of conversations is the stuff that's internal wins. What's a win for you? Write it down, make note of it, celebrate it.
What just rings to me is this quote I remember saying is success is who you attract, it's what you attract by who you're becoming. And I think when you look at the intrinsic, what you're saying is these are what's driving behavior changes, creating habits within you that indirectly will yield the results, the external. But without these little small micro wins that might be insignificant to other people, but was a big deal for you, we lose sight of such huge potential growth. And that's what that is for me. When you look back at that, and it's not comical, but you think, my God, like look what was hanging on to back then. You just see how small it is. But hopefully, and then now you're saying, CEO, move over. I got you. You need a 5 minute, I'm in, and you see that growth
Yeah.
in such a short period of time. But that's stacking it, right? And I think if you deny yourself the opportunity to look at what you've written down, you don't see how far you've gone. We're always looking forward. The rear view mirror is there too.
Yeah. And it's so interesting how so many of us are wired to focus on the rear view for the negative things and only look ahead for the positive. And as much as we don't want to be constantly looking ahead on the road for potholes, we don't want to look ahead for negatives. That's not a great mindset either. But we want to have as much of the positive in our rearview mirror as the negative. And I'd argue it's more important to take what you can from it. Ariana Grande, that moment. Thank you. Next. Go forward a little bit stronger.
And so how would you give advice to women listening that say, you know, without the negatives or the failures per se, allowing them to, replay it over and over in their mind and beat themselves up, to shifting it to a lesson learned? Like, how do you, because that's a tough step to take. And I know in sales, I could repeat for words the no I got, and then attaching the limiting beliefs and everything to it, to now I'm like, oh, they just weren't a right fit for me. And that took 25 years to make. So what would you say to others who are listening that don't have 25 years to learn that lesson, what they can do to have that bounce?
Yeah. And listen, part of this is a different in personality too, right? There are people out there that are absolutely like, I learn so much more from my failures than I learn from my successes. Totally good and valid. And some people are truly driven and motivated by their failures. But if you aren't, If you are a person who, when you stumble or when you fail or lose a deal, it eats at you and you blame yourself and you kick yourself, that is a negative thing that is holding you back. Go forward. And so if we think about the example of a deal, since we both have deals we've lost and still have nightmares about, um, one of the things for me was actually separating what was good and what was bad. And some companies will do that on key accounts and deals in a group setting, and that's cool. But I'm talking about your own reflection. What was good and what was bad, so that you can learn from those things equally. And so I would challenge, let's say you have a deal, it gets to negotiation stage and you haven't multi-threaded or you haven't proven your business case well enough and the deal falls apart. Okay, you can either sit in that and be like, oh no, now I'm not going to hit my number. I screwed up. I should have done all these things earlier. Split that out. Make that list so you can learn from it. This is your interim step, but also split out. Here's the things that went really well. Mm-hmm. I solutioned really quickly. I managed to go, X, Y, Z through their procurement process. I was able to do all these elements. And the reason why I split those out as an interim step is because you can't just flip the switch right away. And you don't necessarily want to just ignore your mistakes. You want to learn from them. But being able to look at them separately allows you to see, okay, here's the things I need to work on. Here's the things I'm good at. But what I find more often than not when I make those two lists and I put them side by side, and I like paper and pen, it works still, don't knock it, is sometimes I can actually map the things I was weak on to things that I was good on. And then the next time I go to try that, I replace my weakness with one of my known strengths. Mm-hmm. So if I was really good at documentation and what I was poor on was, let's say, presentation communication, I may map those two things on my two lists when I'm looking at this and say, okay, so in my next deal, I'm going to make a concentrated effort. I'm going to make sure that after my presentation, I follow up with my documentation, because that way, even if my presentation was weak, I know I'm super strong in my documentation. I'm going to do that now. And so you start leveraging your strengths to offset your weaknesses in a way that is calculated and productive. But it's those incremental steps.
I think that's great. I think there's also a willingness. Well, first of all, there's going to be a desire to get better. But there's vulnerability there because you have to be intentional with the documentation process. And I know it's like a food journal. I got to write down I ate 3 Mars bars. That might be hard to read later on. Right? But
celebrate it. You just celebrate that. You do you. That's a good day right there.
What I think about is when I was in sales, in working for corporate, I would ask myself 2 questions at the end of every meeting. And I had my little book that I would answer these honestly. And this is the thing, you could cheat and answer them, like tell yourself what you want to hear. I'm like, Karen, this is for you. If you're going to lie, then just don't do it because no one else is reading it. But I was thinking about going on my own. So I was kind of validating like my real value here. So I'd ask myself, did I add value to the call, and would they have paid for it? And so I would start breaking that down to what would have invited them to pay for it versus what wouldn't. And I had to be clear and say, you overspoke, you filled the silence. You were not brief there. You went on too much. And then, but I also would definitely say, because I would talk to myself in the car all the time. People thought I was on the phone, but I was talking to myself. And I would say, good job. Like you did that, and speak really lovingly to me. Again, after years of not doing that, but I was acutely aware of, like you said, what I didn't do well. And then but even more importantly, I would say, why did I do that? And I think it's important to look at patterns and triggers. And for me, sometimes it was like, but then there's a C in front of it, I'd get a little bit nervous. And again, then I leaned into it. I'm like, well, hang on a minute. My friend Jen's dad, he's a C-suite. I talk to him all the time. Right. And so just humanizing and normalizing it. But I think if I wasn't intentional about these are the areas that I'm messing up in or struggling in, and this is why, then for that next meeting, like you said, those were my focus points. And you just start knocking them off and really getting in front of them. But also, when people say, like, what's your authentic voice? Well, it took me 25 years to figure it out, but I know now because I've gone through these activities and I really know what resonates with me. When someone says something or does something, I have a physical reaction going, this is not in line with my values and who I am because of activities like that.
When you talk about the C-suite, and let's get real for a second for anyone who's earlier in their careers, absolutely true. Still true sometimes when you're 20, 25, 30 years in, depending on who that person is, right? Some people come in with
Hmm.
such an ego, such a gravitas that you're just like,
Hmm. Yeah.
one of the things, and I think that's a really common one of the things that I, for a lot of years, kept on a post it next to my computer monitor was if you don't want to be treated for your job title, don't treat them for theirs. And it was such a
Hmm.
basic thing. And some people are like, well, yeah, but that's a given. And I'm like, no, but it was a little bit deeper than that. If I wasn't holding them to this pedestal where they had to be perfect and have all the answers, it didn't give them pressure either. And if I allowed myself the
Hmm.
freedom to think of myself as being on the same level as this person, because I am, we both do our jobs well. They may be 20 years ahead of me. They may have had breaks that I didn't get, right? Or I may not actually want their job. It does not mean that we are not equal as people and that we cannot have a conversation. Should we adapt our communication style for the C suite? Absolutely. Much more brief, much more, all these things. But it's almost giving them a gift to not have them be on that pedestal either. And so it's gifting yourself and gifting
Hmm.
them so that you can just have a real dialogue and conversation.
And the word I heard and wrote down there, Steph, was freedom. Because you're, like you said, you're freeing yourself, but they're accustomed to having to have these broad shoulders and this real status all the time. And when you can remove that and just show up, I say H to H, human to human, the guards come down. Think about our job is to de-risk things, and they're going to start talking to you and telling you things because there's a bit of mirroring going on, but you're inviting them to be like, let's just be real here. There's no facade, there's no big language. But I think, easier said than done. Like, I was that 25-year-old stammering kid who was going to CEOs of hospitals knowing that it was like, take your kid to school today. And I felt it. And I knew that they were looking at me that way. But then over time, you realize that I have something to offer here. And I think that's where the belief comes in. That if you don't believe that, your body language, everything is going to be projected into, you know, not, not, not even, I shouldn't even be here. Like, what do I have that you need from me?
And, we talk about this when we talk about sales calls, right? If you're outbounding or if you have a meeting with somebody for the first time and you say, thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule to talk to me today.
Mm-hmm.
You just set the stage that you are less than.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to them because it has a negative impact on your future communications and relationship. Instead, it's Karen, thank you for joining me today. I am so excited to be able to talk to you and to dig into XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
Equal playing fields.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I would challenge people is if you're finding that job titles or certain personas make you really uncomfortable, and we all have triggers, still do after a lot of years, diversify who you interact with. The more types of people that you are comfortable speaking to, whether that is joining a Toastmasters group or getting involved in, PTA or any of those other things, the more diverse you can make the group that you can communicate with on a regular basis, the less intimidated you become by people who are different or other. You have more confidence in yourself and your ability to adapt to each of those communication styles. And suddenly, other than some physical awkwardness, I remember meeting an NBA player years and years ago, and I was like, good Lord. So, like, starstruck moment aside, the physical element of trying to talk to this gentleman was just a difficult moment. But thinking of them as a professional athlete, as a fan, was so intimidating. What do I say? I sound like an idiot. I don't know how to comment on your game. Well, right? And you just stumble and I blubber. That's my go-to when I'm intimidated. It's not a good look, so I just try to zip it. Um, but instead, flipping to the this person has other interests. I don't have one sole thing. If you're the CEO of a company or a point guard with the NBA, there's other layers to you.
Mhm.
And guess what? There's other layers to me too. So let's find that common ground.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I think those are all great points. And if those of you who are listening and it might still seem daunting, like think about your friends, any of their parents or even family members that you have that are in this executive position. That's a title. That's a role they play at work. Cut the grass on Saturday. They have kids that they drop off at soccer practice. All these things, and I think when we can see them in that light, it helps us normalize and show up in a way that we might not be as experienced as them, but we still have something to add.
I love that point. My dad was a CFO, and it could be
Hmm.
why I've never been scared of procurement. I've never been scared of
Yeah.
finance people.
Hmm.
The more you expose yourself to different people and understand they're just people. And to your comment, I love to say to some people back in the day, business cards off the table, meaning this is just you
Hmm.
and me talking. It's not my job title, your
Hmm.
title. Talk to me. What's going on? What are you struggling with your team?
Hmm.
It puts their guard down and allows them to share their own vulnerabilities too.
That's one thing in presentations and meetings. I never needed to know titles. I mean, I could tell who they were by the questions, but I never wanted to give anyone favoritism or be influenced by their title. The hospital for years, I talked to someone, he was the custodian. I had no idea. And I was like, I treated him the same as everyone else because they're people, right? And I just think when you do that, you're looking at the person. And again, people remember the way in which you make them feel, right? And that's what's going to come out there.
And that last sentiment, I have had that one as a mantra for so long.
Yeah.
People remember how you make them feel. And we're people selling to people. Yes, it's company to company, and people say, oh, well, you buy products from people, and of course you do. Listen, people are going to remember how you made them feel. Not that you had the smartest answer, not that you knew every detail of everything. It's going to be how you showed up and chose to engage with that person.
And what innate strengths do you feel, Steph, women have that bring to that?
I think a lot of women, and I'm always careful not to generalize, right? We're all slightly different colors and flavors and mixtures, and that's what makes it wonderful. I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
women innately have cultivated more empathy. A lot of women have cultivated, and I use that word intentionally, stronger and deeper communication styles where they will forge deeper relationships and look to understand more of another person. And what I mean by that is the simple little questions that come up. First, 3 minutes of our call today, we could have talked about age, where we went to university, job titles, any number one of those things. We didn't, right? Within 3 minutes, understood where you are, why you're where you are, like your life story to how you got there, for what matters for you, your family, and what matters in your day to day. I think women have such an inherent ability to be able to get curious and ask those questions and are naturally and instinctively driven to want to understand the whole person. So, empathy, communication, and really looking to understand the broader picture are three things that, so many women are so good at. And if they can use it as a
Mm-hmm.
superpower, especially in sales, it's not about closing the $1 million deal this year. It's about making the relationship for the customer that comes back 3 times over. Even when you go to another company, they're a customer again. And that's it, because they become an evangelist of you and how you support them as a customer.
Well, and back to the training I did today, I still use Gartner's stat that 53% of the reason people buy is not the product or the price, it's you. And so when people feel, and I'm speaking to women here, but when they feel I can't do it, or they're going to go in the direction they're going to go anyway, it's a commoditized industry. Well, pretty much we're all commoditized. But the reason which they buy is you. And if you lack belief in yourself, you're inviting them to do the same. And so, what you've just said there with empathy, communication, and really understanding, like taking time to understand the full picture, like that's an effective discovery. And most people, that's where I feel you win or lose there. And when you can get deep, but how you get deep is by making them, building trust and allowing them to feel comfortable and disarm. And from what you just shared, like we're able to do that innately.
And I think this goes back to, what would your 7-year-old self say in these moments? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
filter a little bit on some of the language to be a bit more eloquent in these moments, but try to channel your 7 or 10-year-old self before you started putting all of these filters on and all these expectations on yourself. If somebody said, "Oh, I just got
Mm-hmm.
back from a trip," when you're on an initial discovery call, your 7-year-old self isn't just going to go, "Is anyone else joining us for the call?" Your 7-year-old self is going to be like, "That sounds amazing. Do you mind if I ask where you went?" Lean into who you are as your 7-year-old self, and you'll find a lot of those gifts that you innately had that need to come back.
It's just for me, it's there's this perception of who you have to be or what you have to be or say in sales. And just what you said, no, what does your inner child want to say? Like, if someone said, I just came back from vacation, and I'm like, okay, let's start with the agenda. I'd be like, where did you go? Oh my God, what did you do? Is that your first time there? Like and again,
Yeah,
so often I see it hijacking when they say we went to Palm Beach. Oh, I just came back from there. And I immediately make it about myself. So I just think be curious, definitely make it about the other person and tap into your inner child who would be asking probably way too many why questions, but still lean into the curiosity.
absolutely. And even in that example of Florida, one of the things my inner child would immediately go to, what was your favorite part of that trip?
Yeah.
And here's the beauty of sales. You tell me, let's say you went on this amazing trip with your family, and you tell me that your favorite part of that trip was watching the sunrise one morning. I just learned so much about you and what's important to you and your communication style and how to engage you for the rest of our sales cycle from that one answer than through 3 hours of discovery calls.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of it. And that, if you want to
Yep.
be tactical about it,
Yep.
that's the ROI for why embrace your curiosity. Why, embrace your 7-year-old self. If you need to put an ROI on some of this and tie it back to the sale, you absolutely can. At the end of the day, there's both the
Mm-hmm.
soft and hard elements of why this is a good thing.
But holding space for people, um I mean, that's like you said, that's just so powerful that I feel so many people don't do that, and they're asking these real scripted discovery questions. And it's like if you took a few seconds to build rapport and genuinely ask a question with the intention to let them answer, not waiting for yours, like you said, like if someone told me about, the sunrise, like that immediately would allow me to start getting a sense of who they are, what's important to them. And then you tie that back. There's definitely correlations within the business, but when we don't have that, we're kind of going on their job title and what we know about that type of persona. And it's just so like everybody else that if you want to break free and really be that standalone person, it's these small things. And as we're saying, these come innate to women. So why aren't we leaning into them more?
And I mean, I don't think either of us have the exact answer on that. And we all probably have a slightly different journey. I would flip that why. Why is something this way to how do we make it what we want it to be? So if we were to say,
Mhm.
okay, starting today,
Mhm.
what are some things, tactically speaking, you could do? One, write it on a post it. I love post it still. Everybody, you can get this at this point, like the little post its, I keep them everywhere. Right? You can write on your post it, put it on your laptop or next to your camera. What would my 7-year-old self ask? That is a very
Mhm.
simple, tactical thing you can start to do to embrace your curiosity as part of your sales profession. Start your smile folder, your smile jar, whatever you want it to be. Start your highlight list today. And not every day will have a win, but you can do it.
And how do we I'm just going to layer in coaching into this because I feel coaching is so important. But how do you think coaching would allow us to foster this in some who have already adopted it and also create it in others?
So, when we think about coaching, I think about it from the mindset, activity, skill set framework perspective, right? So, what is the root of the behavior we're looking to change? Because the path we take from there is very different based on the underlying cause. So if it's a skill set, maybe I'm struggling because the fact of the matter is I don't feel confident with data analysis. I don't know how to forecast. I don't know. Getting to the root of that in a coaching relationship is so important. So then we can spend, our 15-minute or 45-minute time in that session. Let me train you. Let me make sure you've got this. Let's take that element out of this equation. If it's an activity, maybe you need more opportunities to do the darn thing. Maybe when you only get to do it once a year or once a quarter, you can't develop your own proficiency to be able to address it. So the coaching relationship then becomes creating space and opportunity and practice. If it's mindset, our highest level problem, we get in our own way. Then the coaching conversations, to me, often become much like this conversation, right? And we start with, what is your why? Why do you do what you do? Let's start there and start peeling back the layers of the onion to figure out what is it in your mindset that is holding you back from doing the things you want to do.
You're speaking my language.
Does not surprise me from what I have heard about you.
That's my go-to. I always say, what is your why? What is your purpose? And so I think just back to the coaching, holding space for people is huge. And understanding, is it will or skill? But sometimes when you're holding space, it's just allowing yourself, sometimes they're a sounding board, and hearing yourself and going, oh my God. And that's the goal, right? When we can ignite our own self-awareness, that we don't need, we're holding a mirror up to ourselves. It's powerful. And I think that that's the benefit of coaching. But we don't do that. We kind of, we're maybe masking the reason why someone's not doing something or not fully understanding the root. And then we're not, it's going to be they're going to repeat it, right? Because we're addressing a symptom of it. And so I love the mindset that you said, the mindset, the skill set, and was it the activity you said was the third one?
Yeah. So activity, skill set, and then mindset. Um, and I was in the skill versus will framework for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And then I realized, well, sometimes it's actually neither.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't have the opportunity to do it enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so expecting someone to develop confidence when they can only do it once a year is difficult for anyone, no matter how skilled they are. And so it's adding that third element to coaching practice to really start thinking about, okay, how do we break this down to support with the building blocks that you need, right? Understanding what to do. So our skill set, that's block number one. Opportunity or activity, that's block number two. And that mindset is the final piece that overarches everything. So making sure all three of those blocks are there in your coaching sessions is so important.
Especially doing a lot of coaching for women, is the number one thing that holds us back is us. We get in our own way. Um, so, how would you say, or what are ways, Steph, that we can invite or encourage women to get into a sales role, knowing that it is like, think about your industry. It's male driven, it's tech, it's sassy, not in a sassy our 7-year-old daughter's way, in a sass way. And it doesn't seem like, when I was in sales, my title and what I did wasn't glamorous. People weren't lining up to do that. I loved it. So what are ways you think we can invite, we can empower, we can stimulate more women to join the profession?
Yeah. So we do need more women in the profession for so many reasons. When I'm chatting with younger women or women who are at the point where they're just trying to figure out, I think I need a shift. I need to make more money. I need more independence. I need, fill in the blank. It's, what is their why? Why do they think that sales is the right next step for them? Because we can all have different backgrounds coming into it, but I need to understand your motivation for getting into it. And if your answer is, I want to be able to control my own schedule and make oodles of money.
That's not right.
Let's just reset expectations about, maybe there's a certain industry of sales that would be better for you than others, right? If what you tell me is that, listen, I love meeting new people and I love solving problems to help them. Amazing. That's amazing. Maybe going into a BDR outbound role isn't the best first step for you.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to try to dip your toe in the water to see if you've got the chops to be able to handle rejection, because it's great to say you want to meet people. Are you ready to have doors slammed in your face?
Mm-hmm.
Because we talk about resiliency is so important, right? So maybe it's an inbound SDR role, which is your best first place to go. And you can leverage your strong communication skills and how you like to problem solve and how you like to build relationships in a lower risk way with people coming inbound. They're already hand raisers, they're already curious. You're there to answer questions and support them in their discovery process. The flip side would be, I've also talked to people that are like, oh yeah, I absolutely want to do sales. All my buddies do it. They think I'd be amazing at it. That's what I want to do. Cool. What's your why? Because you just told me other people's why for you. So what's your why? And start pushing on that. And they might be like, well, I like building things with people and seeing their business grow and evolve. I'm like, awesome. Over what kind of period of time? When you see it year over year growing and changing. Amazing. So sales is a really big profession. And when you're thinking about long-term relationships with your customers, account management or customer success management may actually be your best path into the sales profession, because then you can concentrate on the longer term relationship, right? And growth. So I dig into why.
Mm-hmm.
There's also people where, like, the first time you meet them, I think we've all had this, the 16-year-old kid that knocks on your door and, like, somehow you don't even know how, but you've handed over $179 and they're doing your exterior of your house and, like, all the things, because there's such a natural, charismatic person who isn't objection handling you. They are just so naturally on it, understanding what you need and the value. They can read you like a book. They know what they're good at. They got the things. You see those people, you're like, you, outbound, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
6 to 12 months in this role. Let's get you skilled up on understanding terminology and process. And then let's start moving you into an AE role that is, really aligned with the fact that you are a hunter.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you're naturally good at. So for anybody who's thinking about going into sales, I would say ask yourself the question of, why do you think sales? There are lots of flavors, as you and I both know. Sales is not one job. There's also enablement that falls under sales. There's also solutions consultants, which fall under sales. There's a lot of ways that you can be in our profession in a role that is best suited for you and what you're naturally great at.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. That's such a different answer from when I started. It was the green that motivated me.
And that's fair too.
Yeah, but it's got to be more than that, and it definitely it's morphed. But what I'm hearing there is knowing your why allows you to be selective in your role clarity and really create that alignment that you're going to have purposeful, meaningful conversations because you are best suited and best where you feel your strengths are and where you want to be. And so many times I work with people and I'm just thinking this is so not like this isn't a good role for you, and it's not fair because they're not being set up for success. Their audience who they're put in front of it's they don't even want to be there with them. And so it's like if we can get in front of that and really invite these folks joining or trying to get a sales role, because it is a spectrum, to really do some inner work first and say, like, what do I like? If I hate rejection, yeah, like maybe inbound's better for me. Maybe sales as a whole isn't good for you if you don't like rejection, but definitely in a learning and an awareness. And I would even say, it could be another podcast, but when you think about an individual contributor moving to a sales leader or manager role, like even looking at, can I do a day in the life there to really see, like, what am I getting into? Is this in line with my why, where I have to drive results through people now versus product? And is this something I want to get into?
Yeah, that is a whole other topic we could dig into another time, because that transition from sales to sales leadership, and again, whether it's, enablement sales leadership or pure sales leadership,
Mm-hmm.
that is a very, very different conversation where you
Yep.
see people move into it and go, whoa, this is not remotely aligned with
Mm-hmm.
my vision and values for success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I've seen it too often. Um, wow. I can't believe we're almost at the hour mark. What would you say in closing, Steph, for women who are who are in sales or thinking about coming into sales, and they're just a little bit still of an apprehension of perhaps leaning in and competing with and this isn't a man bashing by all means. A lot of my mentors and team members are men. It's just to allow women to find their voice. So if they're still struggling, what are one or two things you would just tell them to really ignite that belief in themselves that they can do that and they can lean into the discomfort?
Yeah. So I would say this goes back to what we're good at naturally. I would challenge anyone who's in this situation. You have a challenge this week. It's not going to be a long one. You don't need a pen and paper. But your challenge is to go speak to one other woman in sales.
Hmm.
You can go send a LinkedIn message. You can join. Rev Genius has a free Slack channel that you can join. There's thousands of salespeople in there. Pick one, anyone, somebody with a sales title, send them a message. Sales is about connecting with new and different people. The worst case scenario, to use your example from earlier today, what is your worst case scenario? You send a message, they don't respond.
Hmm.
Cool. Guess what we're going to do tomorrow? We're going to demonstrate that resilience. We're going to demonstrate that curiosity and wanting to explore sales. We're going to pick somebody else. And it can be someone on LinkedIn. It can be in one of the free communities, like I said, Rev Genius and others, women in sales. There are lots of them out there. For anybody listening, if you want advice, message Karen, message myself. We'll connect on LinkedIn. Um, Go meet one new person and ask them one question. What would your advice be being in sales today for me if I'm looking into getting into the role? Go learn. The one thing that makes amazing salespeople, and we could argue this all day, but I would say one thing that is in every person is the desire to be curious and learn and gain information from others.
Hmm.
So start with that skill. Go reach out to one person this week, ask them what their advice would be to you. Go start learning and start trying.
Amazing. I love that advice. So if anyone's listening, I would encourage you to do that. And if they don't respond, that's okay. Ask someone else and look at the responses you're getting. And I feel what it's going to do is move you out of your head and realize, wow, there is a community of like-minded people that I'm not on my own here. But the only way we're going to find out is if we actually reach out and put some action behind it. So great, solid advice there. Steph, if people are looking to learn more, connect with you, because I know you've shared so much wisdom today and you've demonstrated your own empathy and your own compassion in your years of experience. What's the best way for them to do that?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I am searchable very easily. Stephanie White Sales. Always on the platform pretty much daily, and very eager to get to know and get to help people grow in their careers. So
E-
looking forward to connecting with you.
Excellent. And we will definitely include that in the show notes. So I want to thank you so much for your time, Steph, and sharing your wisdom. Congratulations to all the women out there as we celebrate Women in Sales Month, March. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.